Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas and welcome to the second video of this Unity game development tutorial series. This time we'll be learning how to add a terrain into our game, how to modify and paint the terrain, as well as adding details like trees and grass. Firstly, let me explain what a terrain actually is. In simplest terms, you can think of it as a way of moulding a world with mountains, paths, lakes, rivers, towns, all kinds of things on one singular game object. It's much more versatile than having things like cubes or many different models having to create that world yourself. So giving us the option to have a very versatile terrain and create the world that way means that there's much less resources used whenever we play the game from an executable file. Let's get started. Firstly, we need to add in the terrain object. And much in the same way as we did with these game objects right here, we can go to the game object menu at the top, we can go to 3D object and then go down to terrain. And what this will do is it will add in a main object, but it will give us multiple different options in the inspector panel that we can use to manipulate our terrain. Now you may not physically see it just at the moment, but it's given us the option to name the terrain something useful here. It's up to you whether you want to. I'm actually going to keep it as a standard name of terrain. And if we double click it, we'll be able to zoom out and see the terrain in its entirety. And it may look a little bit something like this, just a completely grey flat object. Now the size of this terrain is huge. It's worth noting though that we cannot change the size realistically in the inspector panel. We have to do it a slightly different way, but for all intents and purposes this terrain is huge. We won't really need to change much, at least not for the moment. Now the biggest clue about what the terrain is over here is you can see these different options that you have here. Let me explain some parts of this. Now, if we click on the second icon here, we can paint the terrain. And the idea of what painting the terrain is, it can mean a couple of different things. We're going to start by selecting from this drop-down menu, Set Height. That's the first thing we're going to do. We are going to build this terrain. It's important to kind of get an idea of what the terrain will look like in your head. So for example, if you want part of the terrain to be mountains, let's focus on that bit first. Don't try and focus on everything all at once because it will not work in that way. So what we'll do is we will use the right mouse button and we'll turn ourselves around. We'll zoom out a little bit and then we'll hold the middle mouse wheel and just move ourselves this way and zoom in. Now over here you can see that there are different types of brushes. Now a brush can be used to heighten or lower any part of the terrain, or it can be used to actually physically paint the terrain either with a texture or perhaps grass or trees. And what we can do is start with any one of these brushes right here. So you can select any one of these and then let's click and hold the left mouse button anywhere on the terrain. Now you won't see too much going on at the moment because if we zoom in, we need to play around with a bit more here. So if we use the brush size here and turn that up a little bit, you'll see that the size becomes much bigger. And the idea is that we want to kind of set a certain height because we want some mountains to appear. So if we select the height button here, we can say 20, for example. And then if we hold the left mouse button and move it ever so slightly, you'll see that the terrain now bumps up. And if I zoom out and hold the left mouse button and move it quite a lot, you'll see that I'm literally able to paint the terrain like so. So at this point it looks like there is a very large kind of bump in the terrain. At this point we're creating that terrain. What we can do is reduce the brush size a little bit and reduce the opacity just a little bit as well. And you can see here that if we do it, nothing actually happens now, even though it technically should, but that's because of this height section right here. So what we could do is we could change it from height and we could raise or lower terrain. So essentially what we've done at this point is we've designed a certain height level of our terrain, and that was setting it as 20. If we were to do the same thing here, let me increase the brush size just a little bit, and for all intents and purposes, let's change the brush as well to this one. And if I hold my left mouse button down and move it quite sharply, you'll see that we start getting quite bumpy looking mountains. Now keep in mind, the reason that it's starting to look like mountains is because we are setting a height. Rather, not setting a height, we're raising from that height, which is the raise or lower terrains. So going back to set height, if we were to do this again here, we would lower them mountains and they would disappear. So we're effectively deleting them mountains. So that's one way of recognizing that if you've not quite got your mountains in the correct way, you can just use the set height to kind of reset everything back. I'm going to hold Control and press Z to undo. And I'm going to go to raise or lower terrain once again. And I'm going to increase the opacity this time. And what this will do is it will make it quite vivid in terms of its ruggedness. So if you hover over some of these things, you can see there literally strength of the applied effect makes it more rugged, in other words. Same with the brush size, increases or decreases the size of the brush used. And you can see the brush being used there, what kind it looks like. Now, what we need to kind of think about this time is how kind of rugged and jagged can we make some of these mountains look? Well, you can actually use some of these brushes, reduce the brush size quite a lot, and you can take it and slowly increase the size, and you can see exactly how that's kind of looking. But it looks very unnatural in some ways, you could say. So how do we kind of smooth this out? Well, there is a tool for that. If we select down here again, we can smooth height. And if we increase the brush size, we can smooth all the area, if we zoom out and pan down, all the area that this is covering. So we can smooth those out just by doing that. So they're not quite as rugged. It's just like a little offshoot from the ground now. So those three, I would say, are the key ideas to creating, raising and lowering a terrain. Set height, raise or lower, and smooth. You can actually poke holes in your terrain if you wanted to. So if I go to paint holes, for example, and I'll do a very small one just here. So let's decrease the brush size. And let's decrease the opacity slightly. And let's change to this brush. We can set a very small hole in our terrain, like so. And what that means is the terrain has literally got a hole in it now. So it's not like the old terrain in Unity.
Sure how to help you with that.
Oh, why thank you, Alexa. Don't you just love it when Alexa interrupts you? So this is literally a hole that you could fall through in your game. The old versions of Unity and the old terrain, you couldn't do this. So this is one of the many perks of having Unity 6 in this case. I'm not going to have a hole in my terrain, so I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo. And I'm going to zoom out and take a look at my terrain. If you want to have holes, you absolutely can. That's entirely up to you. But I am going to go to raise or lower my terrain. For all intents and purposes, let's have a nice star. Let's make it quite big. And let's have a star kind of feel about there. So that looks really jagged and ruggedy. Some rugged rocks. I kind of like that. So at this point, we've kind of built our terrain. It's starting to look like some kind of world you could imagine, but there's much more that we need to do. Adding a texture to a terrain is done pretty much the same way as adding it to any game object, except we can use it to our advantage if we add multiple textures and we're able to paint multiple things. So for example, we need to add a texture to this terrain so as it doesn't look grey and boring. And in order to do that, we need to go to a couple of different options and enable ourselves to paint in the correct way. So remember, with painting can be raising or lowering a terrain or flattening it, changing its shape. It can be used for painting a texture, and it can also be used for painting grass and trees onto your terrain as well. So let's go to Paint Texture right here, and we need to create a layer. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Assets, I'm going to right click, Create, and go to Folder. And then I'm going to type this as just Terrain. And we're not going to do anything specifically in here, but we're going to use this, at least definitely in the future, for different parts of our terrain. So let's click back on our terrain up here in the hierarchy, and let's go to Edit Terrain Layers, and let's go to Add Layer. Sorry, not Add Layer, we need to create a layer first. So create a layer, and we can add layers later on. So what this means is that we can now click on Grass if we wanted to, and it will change it all to grass. And the great thing is, if we're not happy with grass as the main texture of the actual terrain, we can just kind of delete it. So let's delete that layer. There we go, remove layer. So it removes that, which is great. But let's go to create layer once again, and let's try with dirt this time. And let's double click dirt, and there we go. So now it looks a little bit more like it should in terms of a terrain. Now, if we click on this here, it also gives us the option to add in the normal map. Remember when I said that you can use textures on terrains much like you do with a game object? Well, this is where you can add the normal map. So if we go to our textures, we could use this dirt normal map. So let's drag and drop onto there. And you could use the color tint if you wanted to and give it a bit of a darker, grittier feel, as it is dirt, I suppose, which is perfectly fine. So we've started painting our terrain. But what I would like to do is I want to have some kind of stone path surrounded by some grass. And how do we do that exactly? Well, again, it's all about creating those layers. So if we go to our terrain folder, once again, you'll notice that we have two layers that have appeared here. One is grass and one is dirt. And what we can do is we need to basically use this grass texture to apply it onto here. And you can see I'm dragging and dropping, and you can't really do anything, but it's the term of we want to use the grass on the terrain. So what we do is edit terrain layers and add layer. And you can see the original grass layer that we have there. So let's double click. And now let's select this grass layer, and we can use this to paint grass on our terrain. So let's select this paintbrush here and let's paint like so. So imagine this is like MS Paint or something in the old days, and you want to paint some grass on your terrain. Well, there you go. You can select any kind of actual brush down there, and you can see that it kind of blends ever so slightly into the actual terrain itself. And at the moment, I know this terrain looks very staring into oblivion because it's the same texture repeated multiple times. Don't worry about that too much now. You've got to remember, even at this distance, the actual terrain is huge. So when we have a character player on the terrain, it won't look quite as bad. But for now, let's paint a little bit of terrain. There we go. So we've got some grass there. That's all cool. But now we want some kind of path. Well, again, we've learned how to quickly do this. And that's the great thing about painting onto the terrain. We can go to Edit Terrain Layers, Add Layer, and, sorry, not Add Layer, Create Layer. Remember, you always create and then add. And we just click on the path, the stone right there, and it gives us the option. So let's do the same thing again. Let's go to that right there. Let's select a normal map. So let's select and let's go to stone right there. And then we can use this and paint it like a path. So let's scroll down. Let's get this right here. Let's decrease the brush size, quite small, and let's have a path like so. So we're going to have some kind of maybe village around here or something like that. But you can see already that there we have a path set in place. And as always like this, you can use this to your advantage. If, oh, I've made a mistake there, you can always change your brush back to grass and you can just change how that looks. You can change the color tint as well, so you can make this look much more green, like so. And I think that looks a bit better than the bland kind of green that we initially had. And you can do this with as many textures as you want to. And I think it's very dependent on how you want to kind of illustrate this on a terrain. So for example, if we were to take this stone texture, we could paint over this mountain right here. And it does distort it slightly, but I wouldn't worry too much about it because we can use the materials to our advantage to make it look a little bit better. So let's combine both of this now, okay? We want to flatten this area out now because it doesn't really look like a mountain. It's not mucky enough. It looks more like it should be a flat ground. So although we've already painted it, let's go to set height, use the same brush as 20, and let's lower all that area like so. And you can create some really interesting effects if you're doing something like this, because it looks quite jagged and rugged now. So that might actually look kind of cool. But at the same time, let's smooth that height just a little bit. And what we'll do is we will decrease the opacity, increase the brush size, maybe not quite so big, to cover up that rough area, and let's click once, twice. And now it's made it not quite as jagged, so it looks like a really rough, rugged area. So using all of that, the painting tools and using the height and ruggedness tools, you can really make your terrain pop and really, really stand out. Adding grass and trees to your terrain can really make it pop in terms of a big, wide open world with a forest and perhaps just a general walking area. The way we add trees and grass is actually done very differently, although fundamentally they are still the same as painting a terrain or raising or lowering it. Now the idea is that we need to import some grass textures and some trees before we can actually use them in our terrain. So in order to get things going, let's go to our terrain folder and let's import a tree. And if you go to the pinned comment, you can download this tree absolutely free. Just remember to unzip it before you try importing it into Unity. Now, if we go into here, if you are in the universal render pipeline, which I explained in the last tutorial why we're in this, you'll notice that this is indeed pink. And the reason it's pink is because of shaders. I won't get into shaders at the moment. It's something we will cover later on, but TLDR, a shader is what makes a material work and display things in the correct way. Now the idea here is that the reason these are pink is because they are using an incorrect shader. And I like the way these trees do it because it gives us an opportunity to thoroughly explore different options within Unity. So what we firstly need to do is make sure that we have the correct setup in terms of shader. Now the shader I'm going to select is the one you should have as well. And the idea is that we're going to be able to change this shader and this material, and the tree will not be pink when we use it. So firstly, select this one right here, which says optimized bark material. What you then need to do is click on shader, click on Universal Render Pipeline, and then click on Nature, and then click on Speed Tree 8 PBR Lit. And then do the exact same thing with the next one. So this one right here, if we go down to Universal Render Pipeline, and then go to Nature, and then go to Speed Tree 8, you'll be able to basically use this tree as intended. Now, what we need to do is we need to click on our terrain and we need to go to this option right here, which is Paint Trees. Now, as we go down into here, we need to add the trees in. In this case, it is just one single tree. So what we need to do is go over here to where it says Edit Trees, and it says No Trees Defined. That's because we need to define the tree, obviously. So we can click on Edit Trees and click Add Tree. And it says, please assign a tree. So we can drag and drop this currently pink tree onto here. And then click on add. And the great thing about this is that you may get an error down here, but don't worry about that at all. The next thing to do is attempt to paint these trees in a certain area, i.e. over here. So let's zoom in to here, the rough grass area. Let's scroll down and make sure we have a few things set right here. So it says brush size 40, tree density 83. So if we press the left mouse button, we will see some trees suddenly appear. And that's really, really great. But they look a bit too clustered. So let's hold Control and press Z to undo. And let's reduce that tree density and then try again. There's much less trees. Now, we could also play around with the tree height and make it random. And this section here dictates how random it can be. Now, the area of randomness is quite small. So if we pull this to right to the end and then try again, you will see the trees at a couple of different heights. And the same again, if we bring it down this way, you should see them slightly different as well. They are very, very slightly different. But we don't want to necessarily lock width to height. So we could increase this, make it random. And we can see, yep, there are a couple of different ones. And you just may have seen one of the trees looked a bit strange there. But I would recommend playing around with some of these options, maybe the colour variation, and just building up some trees like so. And if we zoom in, we can see how they will appear. Now next, let's take a look at adding some grass into the mix. And we are going to get into more trees later on when we add more models in. But the grass is the key thing next to make it look a little bit more like a game. So in order to do that, we need to go on the next option here, which is Paint Details. And what we need to do is add in a grass texture. So let's go back to our terrain folder. And let's import the other texture that was in that download that you got from the pinned comment, and it is the grass. Now this one is a little bit easier to kind of set up and get the grass in place. So what we can do is go down here to edit details, and let's add in grass texture. There's a couple of different options here, but essentially all we need to do is click on the little button there and click on the grass, click on the X, and then click on add. And already we've got the grass in place. So let's decrease the brush size a little bit. Let's increase the opacity. And then let's start putting some grass in around our terrain. So all I'm doing there is just painting the area using the left mouse button. And we can put that all around there. So at this point, it's starting to look more like a game, like an area you would be able to walk around in. And you can be a bit more refined with some of these grass placements, like changing the brush sizes and just placing them just along there. And why not paint some more trees while we're at it? So let's go to this here. Let's change the brush size and let's put a nice tree there. Increase the brush size, increase the density, and let's put a bunch of trees there. And I think that looks okay, so they're not intersecting with the path. Perfect. So at this point, we've created a terrain. We've created a lot of versatility to it. And we've added all these trees, but I'm going to paint a little bit more because those trees I'm not convinced should be on the dirt. So let's go to here and let's quickly go to paint texture. Let's select the grass and let's paint this grass all here like that. So it's as quick and as simple once you know what you're doing of how you can actually quickly generate a cool looking terrain. And I would really, really recommend kind of taking some time and building up your world at this point. Right now we have a nice terrain in place, but did you know you can actually physically edit some of these things while you're on the terrain and you can physically see it change? For example, if we zoom in to the grass and we think it looks okay, it looks green, but maybe we want a different type of coloured grass. Well, even though we have the grass texture, we don't need to add in any more textures. We can go to our grass and we can go to edit details and we can edit the grass texture itself. The healthy colour you could change to any kind of green you wanted. Like you can see, I've got my left mouse button held down, and as I move this around and edit it, you can see how much that's changing. Dry colour, Obviously, the dry color is going to be used a bit more in terms of the kind of visibility. You can see grass is always going to have that popping kind of dryness to it. So if we have it as green as well, you can see it really shines. But I would recommend having this kind of a pastel-y kind of color. And I think that looks okay. Next thing, you could directly change the minimum width, the minimum height all at the same time. So max height we'll put as 20, and you can see just how much that will change. So what that's doing is that's really increasing how it should be. And I'm not convinced that that's the best way to go. So why don't we change that down and have max height and minimum height the same? Maybe. Sorry, the minimum width, because ultimately it's going to happen and it's going to go stretchy, and we don't want that. But that also happens with the height as well. So we should change the maximum height to 1 as well. And you can see just how much that changes. Unless you want some tall grass, you can do that. And you can see just how much you can change the actual terrain live like this instead of having to re-add textures. But let's say if I hold Control, press Z to undo, change that to back to 2 and that back to 2. What you can do is, even though that exists, let's say you want only certain areas to be tall grass. Well, you could use what you already have, which is this one, and keep it as tall, or you could add in another texture and recreate that. So let's add the grass in again, and let's have the dry color as like a pastel-y kind of green, and let's have the max height as 10. And detail density will increase this a bit more. And what's going on there? I didn't press add. That was my fault. Let me try that again. Make sure you do press add. That's one of the common things that people do forget. They forget the little add button is down there. So let's have that there. Detail density higher, and max height was 10. So click add. So although they do look the same, this one now, if we paste it, does look a little bit different. But you can also change this on the fly. So go into edit. Let's change this to 5. So it's a little bit more. There we go. I think that looks pretty neat. And it's something that you can play around with. Like if you're not happy with how it looks, play around with it. If we were to go back to this original grass and press edit, and we could change the max height again here to 20, and you'd see that original grass texture we put down bump up. But the second one, we didn't. So this is how you can edit parts of a terrain on the fly quickly and easily. Now it's also worth noting that if you do hold shift, you can remove textures as well. So if I hold shift and do that, you can see that all of that is being removed, but it will remove everything in terms of grass. So if I hold Control, press Z to undo. And if we try it here against the trees, it won't do the trees. It will only remove whatever you have selected as the tool up here. If we were to go to trees and do the same thing, it would remove the trees, not the grass. So I'm going to hold Control, press undo for all of that. And I'm going to quickly brush up on this bit there so as it's a bit more grassy. Let's add some grass in there. Let's have some tall grass there. Cool. And as you can see, the terrain is really kind of starting to come together. There is a lot more to the terrain, but everything we've covered in the last 20 minutes or so is more than enough what you'll need to create a cool looking world. And let's say this path looks a little bit flat, you know, you're playing it and you think, I know, I need to kind of bump that a little bit. Well, you can easily do that. Remember, you go to this here, the paint terrain, and then you can set height, or you can raise or lower, then you can select it. Let's select the opacity smaller and just have a little bump there in the path and a little bump there in the path. And there we go. It's as quick and as simple as that once you're used to how the terrain works. And then you could kind of smooth height a little bit like that just to lower the bump. And it's quick and easy. Like I say, the terrain is the most important part of a lot of game development. And so far, this is looking like a really cool kind of open world. Next time what we're going to do is cover something called the canvas, and that's also going to include a lot of UI elements, and we're also going to take a look at animations as well. So please remember to subscribe and click the notification bell to stay up to date with every tutorial, and I will see you next time.